And I realized that I love the process. I feel like it brought the joy back to photography and it was fun. And then I was like, well, why don't I just do this at the studio too?
Welcome to this week's episode of Photo Pros Weekly. I'm Brandon Heiss, and as always, I'm joined with Olivia Tuttle. And this week, we are happy to have our guest, Sandra Coan. She is a family, maternity, and newborn photographer based in Seattle, Washington. Welcome to the show, Sandra.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you as well. And for those that don't know you, Sandra, give us a little bit of an introduction to you and maybe even kind of go into how you got started into photography.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, I'm a Seattle-based newborn family and portrait photographer. I shoot exclusively on film in my studio. I think it's a little different about my work and my approach to what I do. And I've been doing it for a really long time. So I started my business back in the 90s, like actually 1999. So this 2021 is my 22nd year doing this. And I feel like I started the same way that a lot of photographers start, which is kind of by accident. I never, intended on being a professional photographer. I'm self-taught. I didn't go to school for it or anything like that. In 1999, I was a kindergarten teacher, actually, working for Seattle Public Schools. Loved my job, but just wasn't making very good money at it and was really struggling to get by as a teacher. And all the teachers in my building had second jobs, as sad as that
Wow.
is. I mean, that's a whole nother
Sure.
conversation. But, I didn't want to wait tables or cocktail in the evenings. And one of my friends, whose maternity photos I had done for her, suggested that I start offering photography on the side as a way to supplement my income. So that's what I did. And it kind of took off. And so after about a year from that time, when I made the decision, like, okay, I'm going to put this out there and see what happens. But a year after that, I went down to part-time teaching. And then about 3 years after that, I decided to quit teaching altogether and go into photography full-time. And that's what I've been doing ever
Well,
since.
that's an amazing story. And I think a lot of people listening can relate. Maybe at this point in time, they are using photography to maybe supplement some income. Maybe they're a weekend warrior where they're trying to just do a little bit of photography on the side, try to, perfect their craft and before they dive in and maybe leave their 9 to 5 for this full time. But I think you said something really unique that not many of the photographers we talk to are shooting film. And I think that makes you unique. I know film has kind of had a resurgence as of lately, past 2 or 3 years. I think, we talk to a lot of camera stores and they say, yeah, our film is selling like crazy. Tell us a little bit about film and was it I guess what's the reason? I mean, did you ever go shoot digital and made a return to film or what's the reason you're still shooting film?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, like I said, I got started in the 90s. So when I got started, we were all film photographers, right? Because that's all there was. So that's how I learned. And when digital photography came along, I did do the switch because I believed like that's the way the industry was going. And if I wanted to stay relevant, I had to learn how to work with a digital camera. So I worked exclusively with digital for about 5 years, and we just like never got along. Honestly, like it was always a battle for me. And also keep in mind when those first digital cameras came along, they weren't
They
that
sucked.
great, right? They
They
weren't.
sucked.
Yeah, they did. They weren't, what we have now. And so I found myself suddenly spending so much time on the computer trying to get my images to look the way that they had looked when I was shooting film. And at that time, I'd also had babies. I have twins. And so I had newborn twins at home. And I was like, boy, you know what? The last thing I want to be doing with my time is sitting on the computer editing these photos. And so one day I was just like, well, this is dumb. Why am I doing this? Why am I spending all this time trying to get my photos to look like they looked when I was shooting film? Why don't I just shoot film? easy peasy. So that's what I did. So I started shooting film for family work, for like my personal work at first, because part of that process of me not wanting to be on the computer, um, I had noticed because I wasn't taking pictures of my own kids because it felt like so much work to sit down and then edit them. And so I was like, okay, well, why don't I just start, photographing my own kids with film? And I realized that I love the process. I feel like it brought the joy back to photography and it was fun. And then I was like, well, why don't I just do this at the studio too? Because like I said, I had been a self-taught photographer that whole time. And as such was a natural light photographer. Studio lighting scared me to death. But when I went back to shooting film, and especially shooting film exclusively inside in Seattle, where we have some very dark days, I decided, okay, well, if I'm gonna do this, if I'm gonna shoot the way that I want to, then I'm also gonna have to tackle this other part of my craft. And that's when I learned how to use a strobe. And I was so scared.
So when was that? So you did natural lighting in the beginning of your photography career.
Yeah.
When did you pick
almost
up artificial lighting?
I picked up artificial lighting in around 2011.
Okay.
So about that same time that I came back to film. Because, before in the 90s when I was working with film, I didn't have a studio then. I was working on location. I was going to people's homes and that sort of thing. And so I could kind of always make it work as a natural light photographer. I moved into my studio, the same studio I have now, when my twins were born in 2006. And at that point I was shooting digital. And so on those super dark days, I could kind of make it work, but I was doing all the things that everybody does, like I would crank up my ISO as high as it would go. And keep in mind, this is, digital cameras weren't that great. So there was all this digital noise. They just really weren't pretty. So then I was like, well, that's not going to work because I don't like the look of that. And so then I would start, paying attention to the forecast, right? Try to schedule around the forecast. Well, that's really hard to do in like November in Seattle when it's dark by 3 o'clock and raining every day, So I just was running into a lot of problems. And so that's why I was like, okay, I'm just going to
Well, I'm sure you noticed a huge difference too in post-production, because I know you said you hate spending so much time editing your photos.
Yeah, I did. But at that point, when I started with artificial light, I'd already kind of transitioned back to film. So post-production wasn't that big of an issue for me at that time because my lab basically does post-production. But I still shoot digital sometimes now. There's some, when I do mini sessions or something like that where it's just a different model than my normal flow, I will grab my digital camera. And oh my God, yeah, the post-production when you are in control of your own light, just like it changed everything. It's so fast.
Give us a rundown, Sandra. How many rolls of film would you normally shoot, let's say for a newborn session versus a maternity session? I mean, does that vary?
Not really. I mean, I've been doing it long enough that I kind of have my flow down, right? Like I've got my system. I shoot medium format and I primarily shoot with a Hasselblad H2, which is a 645 model. This is super nerdy film
That's
talk.
good.
I
People
realize.
like that.
So what that means is that I get 16 exposures on a roll of 120 film. I also do shoot from time to time on a beautiful old Rolleiflex 2.8E, I believe. And with that camera, I will get 12 exposures on a roll. So, depending on which camera I'm using, I'm getting between 16 to 12 exposures per roll. And I normally shoot about 3 to 4 rolls per session. So not a lot. I mean, if you think about that.
Well, that's a dream to some people. I mean, some people, if you said I'm shooting 36 photos.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's kind of the beauty of film photography. For me, it changed the way that I show up to a session. I feel like when I was shooting digitally, because of the ease of it, and because of how fast it was, I felt a lot of pressure just to start shooting the minute people came in my door and just go, 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 go,
Mhm.
you know, like the whole
Mhm.
time. You know, I had to capture every little movement or laughter or expression or all this kind of stuff. And it was this kind of manic almost energy, you know, that I felt, and I think that my clients felt as well. And what happened when I started shooting film is that I just slowed down, you know, by necessity, right? When you're only, I always tell people it costs me about the same price as a latte every time I hit the shutter. So when that starts to happen, you start thinking really hard about what you're taking,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like your intentions. But as weird as it sounds, I feel like it's really helped me kind of hone my instincts, you know, especially like working with little kids or whatever. What I found is I don't have to take every shot every second. I can kind of wait for it and feel when it's about to happen and get it one time. So I do feel like it's made me a better photographer in that way. But I also know that it changed the energy in my sessions. And especially like, um, I know you have kids,
Yep.
right, Brandon? Like, you know, I don't know if you do, Olivia, but uh, you know how like they're like little empaths, right? Like they can feel your
Oh yeah.
feelings and like, and if you're wound up, they're wound up and like vice versa. And I feel like now that my sessions are slower and I don't feel this need to be capturing everything, we have these built-in break times because I have to change out my role. And so then they can calm down, they can go eat some goldfish or whatever. I feel like everybody is just more chill, myself included, and my little tiny clients. And it's just really created such a nice flow to all my sessions that my clients comment on all the time. You know, so many people were like, wow, that was really fun, or that was really relaxing, which of course makes me happy. That's what I want to hear from
Sure.
people.
You know, it's really unique, and I think a lot of people, the pressure does get to them in this industry. You know, I think they feel the pressure from the client. You know, I think a lot of people that I know who shoot weddings, it's like it's go go go. You know, or you feel like you're not like you're wasting your client's time. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and I think you kind of approach it from a different angle. Like they're paying to be there. They're paying for this service, and you're making a, you know, because you're shooting film, it's a more relaxed environment and it's not go go go, and you're calculated in every frame that you take. So I think that's really interesting, and I don't see that a lot with photographers. Although I think some advice, you know, if more digital shooters could kind of work in breaks and work in those moments where they could relax, I think they'd feel a lot less pressure on the job. We, at the end of the day, we have to remember that yes, these people are paying for a service, but they're paying for something they know they're going to be excited about generally, right? This is something they may want to hang, you know, some wall art, or, you know, share with their family and friends, you know, whether, even if it's just, you know, sharing a digital file, it's something they want to get a good, them in their best light, you know, no pun intended. But
Yeah.
so that's really interesting that you say that. Now, you know, working with kids, I think a lot of people would say I would never do that in a million years. Like,
Yeah,
what?
that's what I was thinking. It
Why
has to be
kids?
very uncontrolled, right?
Yeah, that totally goes against you know, calm environment.
Yeah.
That's like chaotic to me.
That's my superpower, though. Like, you know, like I said, I was a kindergarten teacher before I was a photographer. Like, I feel like little kids are my people. Like, I've got their number, and so, and I just feel like we work really well together. Like, I don't know, I love working with kids. They're completely insane, right? Like, you just kind of sometimes you have no idea what's going to happen. Like a newborn, of course, is pretty predictable, but certainly by the time you know you're working with a toddler or whatever. But that's the fun part, honestly. Like, I love that, and like I'm a portrait photographer,
Hmm.
right? And I sell myself as a portrait photographer. I don't say I specialize in working with children. And part of my job as a portrait photographer, and why I like to talk about that first, is because as a portrait photographer, it's my job to capture a piece of whoever is sitting in front of my camera in the image, right? Like to show their personality and to see who they are in this moment in time. And that just takes on for me like an extra level when you're working with kids, because kids just show up
Yeah.
as they are, right? They're not trying, they're not like, I'm going to try to be sophisticated today or fancy today. They're just like, this is who I
You
am
get what you
right
get.
now in this moment. And so let's do this. Um, and that just makes it really fun. I remember I had a shoot, right before COVID, where this little girl came in just so stinking cute. She was like 3 years old. She had this like curly hair and she was in this little pink coat that she refused to take off. And she had this stuffed animal. It was like a penguin or a cat or something. And she just insisted that that stuffed animal was in all of her portraits. And her parents were like, I guess that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And so, but I have this beautiful Oliphant custom made, backdrop in the studio. It's so lovely. And so we did these really super formal pictures of this girl with her stuffy. And they're just like things like that. Like even if you like tried to script it, you just couldn't. And that's the fun of working with kids is
Yeah.
because you never know what you're going to get, but it's always going to be 100% authentic because
Absolutely.
kids can't not be authentic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting. Now, is there ever any moments where you've been like super stressed or something's just gone totally haywire in a shoot with a kid? Like
Oh, sure.
what's the percentage that just gets shut down because they're like this kid's in the corner just throwing a tantrum?
Oh, I have a lot of that. Um, Less so now. I think at the beginning of my career, like I said, kids can read your energy. They're like horses, how they're
That's
like,
exactly what I was thinking. It's that sixth sense.
yeah, you're like you can't go up to a horse if you're afraid of horses, right? It's the same thing with a 2-year-old. Like you can't approach a 2-year-old if you're afraid of 2-year-olds. So I think at the beginning of my career, when I was a little more nervous and when I was a little more manic about the way that I was showing up, I would have more of that. Now I've been doing this for 22 years. And so I get it. I kind of know what to expect. Like I know what to expect out of a newborn. I know what to expect out of 6 months. I know, at what ages you've got 15 minutes to make it happen and at what ages they're going to give you 45 minutes. And so I don't have as many tantrums now or difficult times, I think, because I speak their language and we understand each other. Now, interesting, this has just started happening. So I had to, shut the studio down, close the doors during COVID, as everybody did. And I've just started seeing clients again on a limited basis, not like I used to, but I'm starting to see clients again. And what I'm finding now is that after these kids have spent the past year in their homes, basically seeing no one but their families, we haven't had schools open here in Seattle or preschools or anything like that. So we've all been pretty isolated for an entire year. And when you're maybe a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or, an 18-month-old, a year is a huge chunk of your life, obviously most of your life. And so what I'm finding now when kids are coming into the studio, whereas before I could work my Sandra Coan charm and everything would be great, I'm realizing that I'm having to spend a lot more time just sitting and talking to the kids before I start shooting because I have been getting scared kids or kids start crying or kids like, why aren't we in our living room? This is freaking me out or I don't know you. And so that's been really interesting. And I'm curious to see, how long it will take for us all to get back to normal. But other than that, I really don't have a lot of crying children.
Do you keep a lot of, you shoot maternity shoots as well. So do you feel like you have a lot of return customers when they have the kids as well?
I get lifelong customers. So it's been really fun. So I have, because I've been doing this for 1,000 years. So now I have clients whose maternity photos I took and then they're newborn. And then I've been working with them every year, family photos. And now I'm doing high school senior portraits, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's something really special when you do maternity family work is that you really do have the opportunity to become, a lifelong photographer for your family.
And keep those relationships, definitely.
Oh, 100%. And just be invested. Like I get Christmas cards and holiday cards and I get, graduation announcements. I'm going to start feeling really old when I start getting the wedding announcements. I'm sure that's coming.
Just means that you've been in your career for a long time.
Yeah.
That's good.
Absolutely. Sandra, let's talk a little bit about gear. I mean, is there a piece of gear, obviously besides the camera, that you're always like you could not live without? I mean, you mentioned lighting a little bit. You're in Seattle. Is there something else, or is lighting the main thing that you just cannot live without?
Well, I love my lighting. I do. And it's funny, I still will work with window light every once in a while or natural light. And I've gotten so accustomed to using my lighting, and I always have my strobe set to beep when they go off so I know that they're firing. And I'll work with the window and the window won't beep at me. And I'm like, how do I know it's working? But it's freaking me out a little bit. But aside from that, I'm a big believer in using a handheld light meter. Part of that is because I'm a film photographer and I can't look at the back of my camera.
Sure.
So that meter is the equivalent of my eyeballs in that situation. So it tells me that the light's good, it's falling on, you know, my clients the way I want it to, there's enough in the shadows, all of those things. It's just, so for me, I don't go anywhere without my meter. I even take it on vacation with me.
That's amazing.
We're like best friends. It's my necklace.
Well, you shoot mostly studio photography, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is it, would you say that strobes and flash are very important, or, I mean, because you use natural light too, but what are you relying on a lot in that situation?
I use natural light maybe 5% of the time.
Okay.
So if people were to go to my Instagram, for example, um, I'm guessing just about everything you see was taken with artificial light. Like I just, there's a, especially as a, I mean, I don't want to say especially as a film photographer, because maybe that's not true, but I think that the way that film and really good light go, I mean, they just are meant for each other, right? Like you can fudge it a little bit with a digital camera, you can underexpose a little bit, but you absolutely can't do that with film. Film needs light. And so when I started incorporating artificial light into my studio work shooting film, I feel like that's when everything changed for me. That's when I was able to really develop my signature style and really build my brand for what I do. My clients commented on it all the time. Like they'll tell me that they hired me because the photos have this look to them, and they don't know what that is, but I know what
Sure.
that is, and it's the combination of my light and my film. And yeah, so I really have zero interest in ever shooting without artificial light ever again.
And that's really difficult to replicate, on digital. Once you have that look, that film look, it's I've heard many photographers, and I shot film in high school, like
Oh, did you?
very little, but that's something I've heard a lot. Like it's very difficult to get that kind of look in a digital capture, even with
Yeah.
Lightroom in an action or something after the fact.
Yeah, I wrote a book in 2019, and just because when you're writing a book, turnaround times and things, like you're in this pretty narrow thing. So I did have to bust out the digital camera and use it a lot while I was working on the book, and was able to match the photos pretty closely. But of course, I can tell the difference, between a digital image in my own work. I'm sure my clients can. I always tell people, who get really worried about those things, it's like I've spent 22 years training my eyes and my brain to be able to see those subtle
Mm-hmm.
differences. Most people can't. But I there's a quality to film that is just really, really hard to replicate. And like you were saying, any film photographer will talk about that and will cite it as their reason why they can never go back.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit. I'm very curious to newborn photography because I think like when I think newborns, I think they're so fragile, right? I mean, I have kids, and you've been around babies, I'm sure, and it's
Yeah.
just like, how do I hold it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, this isn't the first time. Like you do it enough, you're more comfortable. But like, what are some things you really take into consideration um, with newborns? Not only to make sure that the newborn is like safe, and you're taking all the safety precautions, but like I would think you need to be more worried about the parent and like what they're feeling. Like they're super emotional generally right after giving birth to a child, or
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's their first child. They're like, oh my God, we've got like generally a
Yeah.
stranger, working with my child. So what are some of the things you do, when you're working with a newborn photographer or with a newborn as a photographer that just gives comfort and peace of mind to everybody in the room?
Such a great question. I'm so glad you asked because I'm actually so passionate about newborn safety, and it is such a huge part of what I do and a part of my education because newborns are fragile. They're these little teeny tiny human beings, and they mean the absolute world to their families,
Hmm.
right? So you never want to put a newborn in an unsafe situation at all. And that has really shaped the way that I approach newborn photography. So there's a movement in newborn photography for really ultra posed work.
Hmm.
And you'll see a lot of that. What people don't realize is that or some people don't realize, is that those really posed positions that a lot of that you see your babies are bent a certain way or propped a certain way. First of all, those are composites if they're done right, which means, there's always a hand on the baby at some point, and then those hands are taken out in post production. I don't do that. I don't ever want to put a baby in a position that's not a natural position for a baby to be in, and I feel very strongly about that. So in my newborn work, you're never going to see that. I call it just baby led posing. I just let the baby be a baby. I think babies are beautiful the way they are. And so I let the babies just be how they want to be. And so what that means is that you will never see a baby in an unnatural pose in my photos. So the most posing I'll do with a baby is I'll roll them onto their belly because babies love sleeping on their bellies, and take those photos. But what's really fun, I think, about that approach for me, and one of the things I love about it, going back to what I was saying about being a portrait photographer, I'm not interested necessarily in manipulating a baby's posture or position to make them look a certain way. I'm interested in taking a portrait of that child in who are in this. And what's so fun is when I'm not posing these, babies will move in ways that are comfortable to them. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard from a parent where, we're working with the baby on the bed, for example, baby's laying on her back, and they'll stretch and they'll put their hand like in front of their face or something. And the mom or the dad will say, "Oh my God, every single ultrasound picture we have, she's in that position," or, he's in that position. And I love that. Like, again, I want to see who these tiny people are. I have another image of a family that I've worked with, gosh, for years. I actually just booked them today for their next session. We've been working together for probably 11 years now, I think. And they brought their daughter in when she was 6 months old, and she made this expression with her face. And she's kept that expression through the 11 years.
Wow.
Like, it's so fun to see an 8-year-old making that expression and a 9-year-old. And so that's really important to me in my work. So circling back, I'm a big believer in baby safety. I don't pose my babies in traditional poses. If you're ever going to work with a newborn and you want to get over the baby or take those, I tell photographers, always make sure your camera strap is on. Again, just like basic precautions, right? That should be number one. Do not place babies in unsafe or unnatural poses if you haven't had extensive training in it. And like I said, I just don't do it in general. Now, as far as the parents, I always say I am a part photographer, part best friend, part therapist because I have heard every story. As you can imagine, 22 years in this, every trauma I've sat, with women in their newborn photo sessions as they are crying and telling me about what a miracle this is and the miscarriages that they've had and the pregnancies they've lost. I've sat with people through that. I've sat with people who, you know, are struggling with nursing their babies. I've heard about, the babies born in the car in the driveway
Wow.
or on vacation at 27 weeks and they weren't sure that they were going to ever be able to make it home. I've heard every story imaginable. Um, and I just try to be really, really respectful of everybody's journey. A lot of my parents that I work with, I think because maybe I'm in Seattle or I'm a big city, or I don't know why it is, but I have a lot of older parents. So a lot of my clients have waited until they're in their late 30s, 40s even, to start having children. So a lot of my clients have struggled at some point with infertility. Um, so I'm really aware of that in everything that I do. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question,
It
but it
does.
is like
It sounds
newborn
like
photography is a thing. It's like you have to be good with your babies. You have to understand how babies they're where they are developmentally, how they move, how they act, what's safe, what's not safe, but also again taking care of your new parents as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's an
sure,
emotional journey for them too. It's
sure,
not just a newborn baby. I always say it's also a newborn mother or a newborn father or a
right,
newborn family. Like they are, especially when it's your first child, it's like you're all in it together and nobody knows what's going on. So
right, right. No, and it's more than just, I would say a portrait photographer working with an adult. Hey, let's go out to the park. You know, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's
take
much more
portraits.
emotional for.
Yeah, there's emotions going on. There's safety, precautions that you need to take, and yeah, it seems like you mentioned, you've got to be a therapist, you've got to be, have your hard hat on, you've got to be a photographer, and so there's multiple things involved. Well, that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that. Now, I always wonder, how do you keep your mental space healthy? Is there any hobbies that you do, that kind of can get your mind off of photography and kind of stuff that you can, revert to just to enjoy, other hobbies, I guess.
other hobbies, I was just laughing because I'm like, I wonder what my husband would say if he knew that I was asked how I keep my mental space clear. I'm like, do I? That's a really good question. Well, I used to love to travel. I'm a big travel. Like I've missed conference season so much,
Oh
for
yeah.
example. Oh my gosh, this year I've missed it. And I used to travel for fun a lot. I'm not doing that right now. So, one of the things that my husband and I decided that we were going to really hone during quarantine and this past year of restrictions was our craft cocktail game.
Awesome.
So we have gotten really good. I've really perfected the tiki drink. And, we're kind of working our way through just like the classic cocktails. So we're doing it, we're doing them well. And it's getting to the point now where it's a little ridiculous. Like we're sourcing that, like, the high quality, craft
Yeah.
gin that somebody told us about that you can get, like it's just gotten a little ridiculous, but it's kind of fun.
I
So
like that. What
that's
is
my current,
what was
current
the tiki
hobby.
drink?
Tiki? Yeah. Is that like, you mean like tropical or?
Yeah, like a really good old school Mai Tai
Okay.
or, you know, like a daiquiri. But like I feel like the daiquiri was ruined by my mother in the 80s, who was really into those like weird frozen daiquiri
Oh yeah.
situations that where they'd put like strawberries and all this nasty stuff in. But like if you just like strip it down to like the original daiquiri, like lime and rum and a little simple syrup. It's really like it's become like my go-to
I
cocktail,
love it.
especially on a
That
sunny
sounds
day. I
interesting.
highly recommend a good old school daiquiri. I'll send you a recipe if you
Oh,
want.
I
I'm
don't mind that
interested.
hobby. I'll pick that up.
Yeah, maybe we need to put that in the show notes where people can find
Yeah,
these
you can add that in your Instagram bio.
There you go.
I
Martini
think I
Monday, Tequila Tuesday. I could get into
and I'm
this.
like, gosh,
Maybe the
it's
first
really
place I
fun.
visit after all the travel restrictions rise is I'm coming to Seattle,
Yeah.
Sandra. I think
Come to Seattle. I will make you a daiquiri and we'll sit on the
I love
patio. It'll
it.
be
I
lovely.
love that. So, well, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, I think, insightful. Hearing about your photography, your film, your work with newborns. Where can people find you, and where can people see your work, Sandra?
Yeah, so probably the easiest way is on Instagram. And you can just find me at Sandra Coan. Coan is spelled a little different. It's Coan. But yeah, just find me there. And, everything you see there was shot on film with studio lighting. So it gives you a really good idea of what I do.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for joining us. That's this week's episode of Photo Pros Weekly. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you do so, whether you're watching here on YouTube or if you're listening to the audio only, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time, and thanks for joining us again.